If I had to single out any event as evidence of extraterrestrial life, of some civilization in a distant galaxy beyond the Milky Way that took great concern for the slow progress of the human race and the human imagination, it might well be the life of Aristotle and his accomplishments. It's almost as if such a distant galactic neighbor might have said, for goodness sake, those human beings, they don't seem to be getting on with it at all. Aristotle, why don't you go down there and get things going? There's so much in Aristotle that is original, that inevitably much in Aristotle would undergo criticism in subsequent centuries. But the sheer intellectual power of this man, expressing itself in biology and natural science and ethics and politics and metaphysics and logic, is, I think it's safe to say, without parallel in the history of at least scholarly thought. There's almost no academic subject commonly taught that has not been stamped by his influence. Sometimes stamped so durably that we had to spend a lot of time to get rid of that stamp and get on with things and perhaps progress beyond the point where Aristotelian thought left the subject. No single lecture, or even the several lectures that I'm going to devote to Aristotle, can do justice to the breadth and depth of his accomplishment. He is the son of a physician. He is naturalistically inclined, interested in biology. He becomes a student in Plato's academy, and he stays there for very nearly 20 years. This not because he's a slow learner. He stays within the Platonic circle. There's evidence that his earliest writings were in the dialogue form. Those writings are no longer with us. In fact, such accounts as we can put together of what he did write, of the treatises he was responsible for, indicate that we've got only the thinnest fraction of the total works that came from that fertile imagination. One answer to the question, what is the Aristotelian position on X, Y, or Z, is, well, do you mean in terms of what survives in his works, or what may have been his position in works that we probably will never find again? At the beginning of his Metaphysics, which is a formidable and significant work in so many ways, it's obviously one of the great works in the history of thought. One thing about it that's particularly important is that it probably is the first treatise that constitutes a critical history of philosophical thought on major subjects. The Metaphysics is the work in which Aristotle sets down the teachings of a wide range of pre-Socratic philosophers, as well as the Socratic teachings themselves, tries to give, and I think by and large does give, a fair hearing. He obviously has his own program and agenda, and that is going to color and affect his judgment of things. But this treatise is the earliest one we have by any philosopher in which there is a systematic presentation of the ideas dominant in the several schools of pre-Socratic and generally Hellenic philosophical thought. And the Metaphysics then is going to examine the assets and liabilities of these schools and try to build upon the assets and avoid the liabilities or the defects. So it's important as an historical document. It tells us perhaps more than any other document just what the teachings of competing schools were. But the work opens up on a new note. I quoted part of the opening passage in a previous lecture. All men by nature desire to know. An example of this is the delight we take in our senses. For even apart from their usefulness, they are loved for their own sake, and none more than the sense of sight. That's how the Metaphysics begins. All men by nature desire to know, so he already accepts that there is an inexplicable impulse within us to develop a knowledge of the world, to develop a knowledge, period, a knowledge of things. And then goes on with the quite straightforward, characteristically Aristotle here, the quite straightforward, matter-of-fact, common-sense position is all men by nature desire to know. An example is the delight we... So here we are not going to have a philosophy that depreciates the evidence of sense. Aristotle is too much the biologist, too much the natural scientist, too much the man with both feet on the ground to be dismissive of the information gleaned by the senses. Not only that, but famously, Aristotle will argue that nature produces nothing without a good reason for it, that chance is not the operative principle in the universe, and that things are to be understood in terms of the purposes they serve. Well, nature certainly would not have fitted out the animal kingdom with sensory organs for the sole purpose of deceiving the entire animal kingdom. And indeed, if that had been the design of nature, the senses as organs of deception, creatures would not be able to get from one side of the street to the other. So we already see in the very opening of the metaphysics a common sense, naturalistic perspective in this work, which is probably the most subtle of Aristotle's philosophy.